The alarm on my wrist unit screamed before I even opened my eyes, and I rolled off the cot straight into the cold floor of the settlement dome, heart slamming against my ribs like it wanted out. Something was wrong. The lights were flickering red, and the translator chip behind my ear buzzed with 3 overlapping voices, none of them calm. I grabbed my jacket and ran into the corridor, boots slipping on the metal grating, and that is where I saw them for the first time in a real crisis, not a courtyard. 4 Valen women stood at the far end of the hallway, back straight, eyes glowing bright amber, staring at a sealed door that pulsed with warning light. One of the settlement's old power cores was overheating 3 levels below us, and if it blew, half the science quarter would go with it. My name is Daniel Hartley, and 8 months ago, I signed up to be a cultural liaison because the job description said low risk. Nobody mentioned reactor failures. Move, I shouted, though I had no authority to give that order to anyone, let alone 4 alien scientists twice my height. The tallest of them, a woman named Elenya, turned those amber eyes on me and did not move an inch. The core will not detonate for 6 more minutes, she said, flat and precise, like she was reading a weather report instead of predicting an explosion. We are calculating the safest shutdown sequence. Calculating is not the same as doing, I said, stepping past her toward the control panel bolted beside the door. She caught my arm, her grip firm but not painful. Human hands were not built for this interface. Then tell me what to press. For a second, nobody spoke. The other 3 Valan women, Sorel, Tovi, and the quiet one named Ashen, exchanged one of those silent looks that seemed to carry more meaning than any translator chip could catch. Then Elenya let go of my arm. Press the 3rd panel from the left, twice, fast, she said. Then hold the 4th panel until it turns from red to blue. I did not question the wisdom of trusting a stranger from another planet, with my life in the middle of an emergency. There was no time for that kind of thinking. My fingers hit the panel, twice, fast. The wall hummed, and a thin stream of steam hissed from a vent above the door. It is stabilizing, Ashen said, her voice tight with something that almost sounded like relief. Hold the 4th panel. I held it. My hand started to shake from the vibration running through the metal, but I did not let go, counting seconds in my head, because counting felt better than thinking about what would happen if I got it wrong. 10 seconds. 20. The red light under my palm finally shifted, slow at first, then all at once, to a calm and steady blue. The alarm cut off, the corridor lights swapped back from red to their normal soft white, and somewhere below us, I heard the low groan of machinery settling into silence, instead of screaming toward failure. For a moment, none of us said anything. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Cyril was the first to break the silence, tilting her head at me with open curiosity glowing gold behind her eyes. Your hands did not shake until after the danger had passed, she said. Every report on human stress response says the shaking should happen during the danger, not after. I laughed, mostly out of nerves, mostly because laughing felt easier than crying with relief. Are alien girls always this curious? We almost got vaporized and you are taking notes. We are always this curious, Tovi said, and there was no shame in her voice at all. Curiosity kept our people alive on a planet with 3 suns and no shade. It is not something we can turn off, even during an emergency. I wiped sweat from my forehead and finally allowed myself to lean against the cool metal wall, breathing like I had just run a marathon instead of pressing 2 buttons. Well, I said, if curiosity is what saved that core, I owe curiosity a drink. That earned me the first real laugh I had heard from any of them, a short, surprised sound from Elenya that she seemed to catch herself making and quickly smoothed over with a straight face. We did not have time to celebrate for long. Within minutes, more people flooded into the corridor. Valan engineers in dark uniforms, a human technician named Colin who worked in the same wing as me, and an older Valan man who introduced himself only as Director Kesh, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had just been told how close his settlement came to disaster. You 4 disabled the failsafe protocol without authorization, Kesh said, his eyes flicking between the women and settling hard on me, and you allowed a civilian liaison to operate a restricted control panel. The corridor went quiet in a different way now, tense instead of relieved. The fail-safe protocol would have taken 11 minutes to authorize through proper channels, Elenya said, standing straighter than I thought possible. The core would have breached in 6. Rules exist for a reason, Kesh said. So does staying alive, Ashen said quietly, and though her voice barely rose above a whisper, it carried through the corridor like a shout. Kesh studied us for a long moment, his gaze lingering on me longest of all, like he was trying to decide whether I was reckless or resourceful, and could not quite settle on either. We will discuss this properly later, he finally said, and turned to organize the engineers, now swarming the panel to run a full inspection. Colin sidled up next to me once the director had walked off, grinning like he had just watched the best entertainment feed of his life. You pressed an unauthorized panel with 4 alien scientists as your only backup, he said. You are either the bravest man on this station or the dumbest. Can it be both? I asked. With you, it usually is. The 4 women did not leave after that. If anything, they seemed to orbit closer to me over the following days, showing up at the mess hall table where I ate, appearing in the archive room where I filed reports, waiting near the courtyard exit when my shift ended. At first I thought it was simple curiosity, the same kind that made them stare at me on that very first day by the fountain, but it slowly became clear this was something different, something sharper. 3 days after the reactor incident, Elenya found me alone in the archive room, sorting through trade records that nobody else wanted to touch. There is something you should see, she said, and there was no flatness in her voice this time, only quiet urgency. She placed a data slate in front of me, and on it was a schematic I did not recognize at first. Lines of Veylan text scrolling too fast for my translator chip to fully catch. This is the original design of the power core, she said, the one that almost failed. Okay, I said slowly. What am I looking at? The failure was not random, she said. Someone altered the coolant regulation 3 weeks ago. The change was small, almost invisible, timed to trigger exactly when it did. My stomach dropped. Someone did this on purpose? We believe so, Sarel said, stepping into the room behind Elenya, followed by Tovi and Ashen, all 4 of them now crowded around the small table, like a council deciding my fate, rather than sharing information with me. Why tell me? I asked. Tell Kesh. Tell your own security teams. Elenya's eyes flickered from amber to a deeper shade, something between worry and determination, because the access logs show the change was made using a human credential. The room felt suddenly colder than the corridor had during the reactor alarm. That is not possible, I said. There are only 6 human staff on this whole settlement, and I know every one of them. We know, Ashen said, which is why we came to you first, before anyone else. I sat back in my chair, mind racing through faces, names, shifts, trying to imagine any of the small human crew doing something so reckless, so dangerous to a settlement that had welcomed us despite years of hesitation and careful diplomacy between our worlds. Show me the log, I said. Elenya slid the slate closer, and there on the screen, buried in a string of technical code, was a name I recognized immediately, a name that made my chest tighten with something between disbelief and anger. Colin. The same Colin who had grinned at me in the corridor 3 days ago, who ate lunch 2 tables from mine every single day, who I considered, if not a close friend, at least someone I trusted enough to watch my back on this strange and distant outpost. There must be a mistake, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, they sounded thin and unconvincing even to me. We considered that, Tovi said, which is why we did not go to Kesh yet. We wanted to be certain, and we wanted you involved because you know him, and we do not. I stared at the log for a long time, the pattern of access times matching perfectly with Colin's known shift schedule, a level of precision that felt less like coincidence and more like quiet, careful planning. What do we do? I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. We watch him, Elenya said, carefully, quietly. If he is working alone, we need to know why. If he is working with someone else, we need to know who. That night I barely slept, running through every conversation I ever had with Colin, searching for some sign I had missed, some hint of resentment, or hidden motive that would explain betraying an entire settlement full of people who trusted him. The next morning, I found him at breakfast. Same seat, same easy grin, same casual wave that made my skin crawl now in a way it never had before. "You look terrible," he said. "Did the reactor scare stick with you longer than the rest of us?" "Something like that," I said, forcing my voice to stay light while my heart pounded against my ribs. Over the following 2 days, the 4 Valen women split their time between official duties and quiet observation, following Colin's movements through the settlement without ever appearing to follow him at all. Alenia reviewed access records late into the night. Sarel monitored communication logs from the science wing. Tovi tracked supply requests that seemed slightly out of place. Ashen, the quietest of them all, simply watched people, reading faces and body language, with the same precision she once used to read data slates. It was Ashen who found the answer first. She caught up with me outside the mess hall on the 3rd evening, her eyes wide with something between excitement and worry. "Colin is not working alone," she said. "There is a second signal, encrypted, sent from a private terminal in the maintenance wing every night at the same hour. We traced it back far enough to know it originates outside the settlement." "Outside?" I repeated. "You mean off-world?" "We mean from a ship in orbit," she said. "One that has been sitting quietly at the edge of our detection range for almost a month, registered under a trade license that does not match any vessel we can confirm exists." My mind spun through possibilities, each one worse than the last. A trade dispute turned violent. A rival faction trying to sabotage the fragile new alliance between our 2 peoples before it could properly take root. Someone hoping a settlement disaster would end contact between Earth and the Valon Compact before it truly began. "We need to tell Kesh now," I said. "Agreed," Ashen said. "But we need proof strong enough that Colin cannot simply deny it and disappear before anyone can act." That night, the 5 of us gathered in the archive room, long after most of the settlement had gone quiet for sleep cycle, poring over data slates and old maintenance logs, piecing together a timeline that grew clearer with every passing hour. Colin had arrived on the settlement barely 2 months before the reactor incident, transferred in from a supply station with a service record that looked ordinary on the surface, but, when Alenia cross-referenced it against older compact archives, contained gaps that should not have existed. "He was never assigned to a supply station," Alenia said finally, her voice tight with the effort of staying calm. "The records were altered to hide where he actually came from." "Where did he actually come from?" I asked. She turned the slate toward me, and there, buried under layers of falsified records, was a name that made the room go completely silent. A private security contractor, one that had, years earlier, been quietly removed from compact trade routes after an investigation into cargo smuggling and sabotage on 3 separate outposts, an investigation that ended without conviction only because the key witnesses disappeared before testifying. "He is here to finish what got interrupted," Sarel said quietly. "The reactor failure was a test. If it had worked completely, and the settlement had been destroyed or evacuated, someone would have profited from claiming the land and the resources beneath it once the dust settled. The weight of it settled over all of us at once, heavy and cold. This was not some small personal grudge. This was calculated, patient, and dangerous. And Colin had eaten lunch across from me every single day, while quietly working to end all of our lives. "We move at dawn," Alenia said. "We take this to Kesh together, all of us, with the evidence laid out clearly enough that there is no room for doubt or delay." None of us slept that night. We sat together in the archive room, running through every possible angle of what Colin might do if he suspected we were closing in, preparing ourselves for whatever came next. At dawn, we walked together to Director Kesh's office, 5 of us moving in step, the same way the 4 women had once walked toward me, across that courtyard on my very first day here. Except now there was nothing curious about it, only grim determination. Kesh listened without interrupting, as Alenia laid out the evidence piece by piece, the falsified records, the encrypted signal, the timeline that lined up too perfectly to be coincidence. His expression darkened with every new detail, until by the end, his jaw was tight enough that I could see the muscle working beneath his skin. "Where is he now?" Kesh asked. "Maintenance wing," Tovi said. His shift began 20 minutes ago. Kesh moved fast for a man his age, calling in security through his comm unit as he strode out of the office, the five of us following close behind, adrenaline replacing the exhaustion of the sleepless night. We reached the maintenance wing, just as Colin was leaving the terminal room, his casual expression flickering for half a second when he saw the size and seriousness of the group approaching him. "Something wrong?" he asked, voice steady, but his eyes moving quickly between faces, searching for an exit that was not there. "We know about the signal," I said, stepping forward before I could stop myself. "We know where you really came from." For a moment he said nothing, and I almost believed we had made some terrible mistake, until his expression shifted into something colder and sharper than the easy grin I had known for months. "You should have left it alone," he said quietly. He moved fast, faster than I expected from someone who spent months pretending to be an ordinary technician, lunging toward the terminal behind him, fingers already reaching for a command that would likely trigger something none of us wanted to find out. Ashen moved faster. She crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides and caught his wrist before his fingers could reach the panel, twisting with a controlled strength that made him cry out and drop to one knee, the terminal beeping uselessly behind him. Security arrived seconds later, restraining him properly, while Kesh stood over the scene with an expression that mixed relief with something like quiet fury. "You almost destroyed everything we have worked to build between our peoples," Kesh said to Colin. "For what? Money? Power?" Colin said nothing, refusing to meet anyone's eyes as security led him away, and somehow that silence felt worse than any excuse he could have offered. In the days that followed, investigators traced the signal back to its source, confirming what Ashen had already suspected: a rival trade group hoping to destabilize the fragile new alliance before it could grow strong enough to threaten their hold on older, less transparent trade routes across the compact. The settlement held an assembly a week later. Humans and Valon gathered together in the largest hall the dome could offer, and Director Kesh stood before all of us to speak. "We came close to losing everything," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "Not because of any flaw in the alliance itself, but because there are those who fear what our two peoples can build together and will go to dangerous lengths to stop it." He turned toward where I stood with Alenia, Sorel, Tovi, and Ashen, and something in his expression softened. "It was curiosity that saved us," he said. "Curiosity that questioned a broken record when it should have simply been filed away. Curiosity that refused to accept easy answers when something did not add up." After the assembly ended, the 5 of us walked out together into the open courtyard, the same one where this had all started weeks earlier, the same fountain still bubbling quietly in the evening light. "I owe you all my life," I said. "More than once now." "We are simply curious creatures," Tovi said, a small smile finally breaking through her usual composed expression. "It happens to be a useful trait sometimes." "Are alien girls always this curious?" I asked again, echoing the words I had laughed out on that very first day, except this time there was no laughter in my voice, only something warmer and quieter. Alenia looked at me, her eyes settling into a calm and steady gold that I had come to recognize as something close to contentment. "Only the good ones," she said. We stood there together as the settlement lights came on around us one by one, human and Valan side by side, and for the first time since arriving on this strange and distant world, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere that mattered. Somewhere worth protecting, no matter what threats waited quietly in the dark beyond our small and fragile dome.